Hey guys, Face and Face Fitness.co.uk here. Hope everyone's keeping well and safe in this lockdown. Okay, and the topic for today's video, I'm going to discuss who I believe are the best boxing trainers of all time. Now, boxing trainers don't always get a lot of love. They're often the fall guy when a fighter loses, but the actual reality is these coaches make a huge impact on the life of a fighter, not just inside the ring and outside the ring. When it comes to getting a fighter prepared, they've got to make sure the fighter makes weight. They've got to make sure they get sparring partners, the correct sparring partners for their fighter. There's so many things they've got to do. Of course, work on a game plan as well. So it's only fair that when you credit great fighters, very often there's also a great trainer behind them as well. So in this video, I'm going to go discuss some of those coaches who I believe should be mentioned as the top trainers of all time. The first one I'm going to discuss is a man by the name of Eddie Futch. Eddie Futch grew up in Detroit, and the famous Brewster's Recreation Center was the gym he would be training in. Of course, the Recreation Center in Detroit was home to the one and only Joe Louis, the heavyweight champion. Not only that, also had Holman Williams, a very good fighter, a great fighter, who was one of the members of the Black Murderers Row Fighters. Black Murderers Row Fighters, a group of fighters, was so good that no one really wanted to fight them or give them a shot at the title, so they resorted to fighting each other. Of course, the most famous amongst those was Charlie Burley, but Holman Williams was also one of the great fighters from the Black Murderers Row. Now, Futch was a sparring partner to both of those names I've mentioned, both Joe Louis and Holman Williams. Futch may be known mostly for being the trainer to the great smoking Joe Frazier, who gave Ali hell in 3 memorable bouts in the 1970s, and was probably the greatest trilogy we've ever seen in boxing as well. But as a boxing coach, Futch was a master strategist. He also helped Ken Norton defeat Ali, and Norton also gave Ali 3 very tough, extremely close fights that could have gone either way. Going further, some of the other fighters who Eddie Futch trained, Mike McCallum, Larry Holmes, Alexis Arguello, and of course one of my favourite fighters, Riddick Bowe, who was heavyweight champion in the 90s. 1997, Ring Magazine also named Eddie Futch as the greatest trainer of the last 75 years. But sometimes it's not just the fighters you train which determine whether you are one of the greatest trainers of all time. It's also the boxing coaches come out from your gym, the guys that you have helped create, who've learned from you, and they've gone out and forged their own path, but they've got their fundamental learning from yourself. And when it comes to that, then Eddie Futch, he's helped cement and create some of the greatest trainers we've ever seen have come from Eddie Futch's tree, should we say. The first coach I will mention who came from the fighting tree or coaching tree of Eddie Futch is George Benton. Now, Benton was someone I wrote about in my book, Forgotten Legends of the Ring. He was a great middleweight of the 1960s, at one point #1 ranked middleweight of the 60s, and he was a very sharp boxing mind, who was also one of the greatest exponents of the Philly shell defense. So when you talk Philly shell, you really have to include George Benton in that conversation. But Benton was also the brains behind a fighter who would go on to be one of the best of the 90s, at one point the best in the world, one of the smartest fighters of all time, and that was, of course, Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker. Other masterful boxers who Benton passed his knowledge on also include Mike McCallum, who was also trained by Eddie Futch as well, and Meldrick Taylor. Benton was, of course, in Philadelphia, just like Meldrick Taylor. Adding to the line of great coaches out of Eddie Futch's stable, we've got Freddie Roach. Now, Freddie Roach is most known for his work with Manny Pacquiao, and really that work alone with Pacquiao, the way he's helped Pacquiao come through the divisions, become world champion, multiple divisions, I believe eight divisions, is it? And training also 25 world champions or more in boxing. That alone, but Pacquiao's work alone, should really set Roach aside as one of the greatest of all time, the way he's sort of managed and coached Pacquiao through those divisions. But outside of that, Roach also trained over 25, I believe 25 at least, world champions. And he's also trained mixed martial arts stars such as Anderson Silva. So Roach is definitely someone who should be in consideration for one of the best trainers of all time. Now, another name which came out of the Boosters Recreation Centre in Detroit was a trainer I'm sure no doubt has a lot of fans for being the best trainer of all time, and that of course is Manny Stewart. Now, Stewart was initially a top amateur boxer when he was growing up, but he then went into the world of boxing training and took over what would become perhaps the most famous boxing gym of all time, the Kronk Gym in Detroit. At one point in Detroit, with Manny Stewart there, we had some great fighters in that gym. As a hotbed of talent. We had Thomas Hearns, Mike McCallum, James Toney, Gerald McLennan. They're just some of the names that are in the gym, the famous Kronk Gym, whilst Manny Stewart was there. Just like Futch had Fraser, Benton had Whitaker, Roach had Pacquiao, then Stewart's name, of course, will always be linked with the hitman Thomas Hearns. Now, Stewart helped develop Hearns from not necessarily a big puncher at all in the amateurs into, in my opinion, the greatest puncher of all time, because no one like Hearns carried his power through the divisions, and probably the most devastating puncher as a welterweight or light middleweight. Hearns was lethal with his punching ability, and Manny Stewart was a big reason for Hearns' success. Hearns, of course, one of the Fab Four fighters of the 1980s, a little golden period of those middleweights, light middleweights, welterweights as well, when Leonard, Hagler, Hearns and Duran, and fifth member would be Benitez, when they were all fighting each other. Of course, Benitez didn't fight Hagler. Okay, so Stewart's had no end of success even after Hearns just established himself as one of his all-time great trainers. He trained over 40 world champions in all, and his work with Lennox Lewis and Vladimir Klitschko is also legendary. They both came to him when they were suffering from knockout defeats, and Stewart just changed their style enough to make them the dominant world champions they would become. Now, another name which has to be mentioned alongside those greats is a man from Mexico. And when it comes to boxing, we always hear the term Mexican style, and there's no better Mexican trainer than Nacho Beristain. Beristain was no doubt a reason why we have such a good and exciting style of fighting coming out of Mexico. Beristain first helped the amateur boxers in Mexico to develop the amateur boxers, and his success there then led him to the professional ranks, where he trained some giants of the game, including, of course, Juan Manuel Marquez. He also trained Oscar De La Hoya, the Mexican-American. And going back to Mexico, he trained two more great Mexican fighters there, Humberto Gonzalez and Julio Cesar Chavez Sr., another one of the best of all time. They're just some of the great boxers he's trained, but definitely Beristain has to be ranked amongst the best ever when it comes to boxing training. Now, in my opinion, alongside Eddie Futch, there are two other names we really need to consider as the best ever. One of them is Ray Arcel, and Arcel has a claim because he trained three boxers who could quite possibly be the best ever in their weight class. The first, Benny Leonard. Benny Leonard could rightly be said to be the greatest lightweight fighter of all time. If it's not Benny Leonard, there's a man by the name of Roberto Duran who has more than his fair share of fans as having the claim to the greatest lightweight fighter of all time. Both Leonard and Duran were trained by Ray Arcel, and then we also have quite possibly the greatest light heavyweight boxer of all time, and that is, of course, Ezzard Charles. Ezzard Charles was also trained by Ray Arcel. So quite clearly, Arcel was a master boxing trainer, and he also helped train three weight classes champion Barney Ross. Now, the other coach is going back to possibly the start of this boxing tree, is Jack Chappie Blackburn. Now, Blackburn was the coach of the world heavyweight champion Joe Louis, and Blackburn, of course, helped to mould the style of Joe Louis around himself. Blackburn had hundreds of boxing fights, so he moulded Louis' style in his own style, so on Blackburn's style of fighting, and also two opponents of Blackburn, Joe Gans, another of the greatest lightweights of all time, another of the greatest fighters of all time, one of the original sweet scientists of the sport, and Sam Langford, someone who many would put in their top 10 all-time great fighters. So if we credit Eddie Futch for his boxing tree, then we've got to credit Jack Chappie Blackburn for his, because Eddie Futch trained in the Boosters Recreation Centre and sparring Joe Lewis. Joe Lewis no doubt got his knowledge from Jack Chappie Blackburn. So we can see Eddie Futch's sort of knowledge actually really stemmed from Jack Chappie Blackburn. And from Blackburn would also come a man who played a part in training what some would view as the three greatest boxers of all time, Sugar Ray Robinson, Henry Armstrong and Muhammad Ali. Harry Wiley Sr. was an understudy to Jack Chappie Blackburn, and he put that knowledge he gained from Blackburn to good use by first becoming the trainer to the 1932 USA Olympic boxing team, and he also spent time in the camps of some greats such as Jack Dempsey, and was around to see Sam Langford, from whom he picked up a number of pointers. From his success with the Olympic team, he would go on to train, be in the corner of Henry Armstrong, who was the only man in history to hold 3 world titles simultaneously, 3 weight classes. Armstrong, also another fighter featured in my book, Forgotten Legends of the Ring. And of course, Harry Wiley Sr. helped train Sugar Ray Robinson from a young age when he was an amateur all the way through his professional career. We know George Gainford's was also part of that combination, but it was Harry Wiley Sr. who would be arranging the sparring and helping to get Robinson ready for the fights. It wasn't just those two great fighters. He of course did train Muhammad Ali for his fight with Jimmy Ellis. Angelo Dundee, of course, being the coach and manager of Jimmy Ellis, preferred to be in the corner of Ellis. And Ali went back to the man he initially wanted to train when he became professional, which was Harry Wiley Sr. Ali was so impressed with Harry Wiley Sr. he actually requested Wiley stay in his camp for the rest of his career, but unfortunately just a few months later Harry Wiley Sr. would pass away. And Angelo Dundee is also on record as commenting that Wiley Sr. was one of the best 3 coaches he had ever seen. Now, there are a couple of notable omissions from those list of names I've gone over. The first is a man who was the coach of the most recognisable or the most popular boxer of all time. That is of course Muhammad Ali, and his coach was Angelo Dundee. And the second is the coach of the man who was probably the second most popular boxer of all time, Mike Tyson. So why have I left both Dundee and D'Amato off my list of top boxing coaches? Now, there's no denying both were great boxing coaches. Well, we're discussing the greatest ever trainers in my opinion. So in which case, they may make my top 10. But when you're talking Dundee was also undoubtedly a great boxing trainer, but he was also more about managing his fighters. Whereas D'Amato, another great trainer, in my opinion, where he stood out was his best on his views on human psychology and motivating his fighters. But as an out-and-out boxing coach, I would not have Dundee or D'Amato above the list of names I've already mentioned. In fact, if you're going to mention Cus D'Amato, you've got to mention coaches such as Bill Miller, who trained James Toney, and also Charlie Goldman, who trained Rocky Marciano. Marciano came to Goldman. He was a short, stout man with little boxing experience, quite a short reach as well, but yet Goldman turned him into an undefeated and unbeaten heavyweight champion, retired with a record of 49-0. So if you're going to put men such as Dundee and D'Amato in that list, then you've got to also consider names such as Bill Miller and Charlie Goldman. Dundee, of course, learned in the famous Stillman's gym, which was where Ray Arcel was based, and no doubt he took a lot of pointers from Arcel as well. I know a lot of people like to romanticise the work that Cus D'Amato did with Mike Tyson, but the reality is there are a lot of great coach and fighter duos. Blackburn and Joe Lewis, Wiley and Armstrong or Sugar Ray Robinson, Arcel, Benny Leonard, Roberto Duran, Manny Stewart, Thomas Hearns, Freddie Roach, Pacquiao, George Benton, Pernell Whitaker, Eddie Futch and Fraser as well. So you can see that there's so many great combinations of trainer and fighter that I would probably put ahead of D'Amato and Tyson. Okay, so that's my take on the best boxing coaches we've ever seen. I wouldn't like to name the best out of that bunch, but we'll say my top 3, and you can put them in any order, and I wouldn't really argue with you. They would be Eddie Futch, Ray Arcel, and Jack Chappie Blackburn. I'll leave a link in the description below for my article, which covers what I've just gone through here, the greatest trainers of all time. and hopefully you learned something from this video. Take care, guys.